At 11:43 a.m. on a gray March morning, my stepmother Patricia cut me off mid-sentence as I approached the podium at my father's funeral. "I'm sorry, but the family has decided the eulogies will come only from immediate family members," she announced to the 200 guests at Sacred Heart Cathedral. What she didn't know was that my father had anticipated this exact moment. 5 minutes later, when the funeral director pressed play on a recording Dad had left specifically for this service, Patricia's face went white as his voice filled the cathedral. "If my daughter Alina isn't allowed to speak today, I want you." Very one to hear this message I recorded for her. Where are you watching from right now? If you've ever been excluded from saying goodbye to someone you loved, this story is about the moment when truth finds a way to be heard. My name is Elena Rodriguez. I'm 34 years old, and I spent the last 15 years being systematically erased from my father's life by a stepmother who saw me as a threat to her version of our family. What Patricia didn't understand was that blood relationships don't disappear just because someone pretends they don't exist. But let me take you back to where this story really begins, to the family dynamics that made Patricia believe she could control who got to speak at my own father's funeral. My parents divorced when I was 12, a painful but necessary end to a marriage that had been struggling for years. Dad, Miguel Rodriguez, was a dedicated high school principal who worked long hours and brought his passion for education home with him every night. Mom, Carmen, was a nurse whose shifts at the hospital meant our family schedules were always complex and sometimes chaotic. The divorce was amicable by most standards. They shared custody, maintained respectful communication, and both attended my school events and celebrations without drama. Dad moved into a smaller house 15 minutes away, and I spent alternating weeks with each parent throughout middle and high school. When I was 17, Dad met Patricia Wells at a school district function. Patricia was the district's communications director, a polished professional who understood the political and social aspects of educational administration in ways that complemented Dad's academic focus. Their relationship developed quickly. Patricia was organized, ambitious, and immediately helpful to Dad's career advancement. Within 2 years, he'd been promoted to district supervisor, and Patricia had become an integral part of both his professional and personal life. They married when I was 19, during my sophomore year at UC Davis. The wedding was elegant and well-attended, with colleagues from the school district, Patricia's family from Oregon, and most of Dad's extended family. I was invited but not asked to participate in the ceremony. No bridesmaid role, no reading, no special acknowledgement of Dad's relationship with his daughter. "We're keeping the ceremony simple and focused on our new beginning," Patricia explained, when I asked about my role in the wedding. "Very intimate, very professional." The message was subtle but clear. This wedding was about Patricia and Dad's future together, not about integrating their past relationships or existing family connections. Over the next 15 years, Patricia systematically worked to minimize my presence in Dad's life. It wasn't dramatic or cruel, it was careful and strategic, designed to create distance while maintaining plausible deniability about her intentions. Family gatherings gradually shifted to Patricia's schedule and preferences. Holiday celebrations moved from Dad's house to Patricia's family's traditions. Social events became focused on their shared professional circle rather than Dad's longtime friends and family connections. Most significantly, Patricia began referring to herself as Miguel's family in contexts that excluded me. Christmas cards were signed the Rodriguez family but featured only photos of Dad and Patricia. Social media posts about family vacations showed the two of them as a complete unit, with no reference to Dad's daughter. When I graduated college, Dad attended my ceremony, but the celebration dinner was cut short because Patricia had scheduled a work function that same evening. When I got my first job as a marketing coordinator, Dad expressed pride privately, but Patricia steered conversations away from my achievements during family gatherings. "Elena's doing well in her career," became Dad's standard response when relatives asked about me. But Patricia would quickly pivot to other topics, as if my accomplishments were briefly acknowledged obstacles to more interesting conversation. The exclusion became more pronounced after Patricia and Dad bought a larger house in a gated community 45 minutes from where I live. The physical distance made spontaneous visits impossible and formal visits subject to Patricia's schedule and approval. "Miguel's resting this weekend," she'd say when I called to suggest visiting. "Work has been very stressful and he needs quiet time to recharge." Or, "We have dinner plans with the Hendersons on Saturday." Perhaps you could visit another time when we're not committed to social obligations. The visits that did occur were structured and formal. Patricia would prepare elaborate meals and invite other guests, making my other guests' time with Dad into orchestrated social events rather than opportunities for personal connection. Most painfully, Patricia began rewriting the narrative of Dad's life to center her role and minimize mine. Stories about Dad's achievements as an educator became stories about how Patricia's professional support had enabled his success. Anecdotes about family traditions became memories that started with their marriage, rather than acknowledging decades of previous history. Miguel wasn't really settled until we got married, she would tell new acquaintances. His life was quite chaotic before we found each other. Chaotic, as if raising a daughter and building a successful career as an educator represented instability rather than the normal complexity of adult life. But the most heartbreaking aspect of Patricia's bride campaign was watching Dad gradually accept her version of events. Not because he stopped loving me, but because constant subtle pressure over 15 years wore down his resistance to her narrative. When I got engaged to my husband Carlos 3 years ago, Dad was genuinely excited about the wedding planning. But Patricia managed the guest list, the seating arrangements, and the family photographs in ways that minimized her presence at what should have been a celebration of Dad's pride in his daughter. Patricia handles all our social planning, Dad explained when I asked why certain relatives hadn't been invited. She's much better at organizing events than I am. At my wedding reception, Patricia positioned herself prominently in family photos while suggesting that larger group shots would be too crowded and chaotic. She gave a toast that mentioned Dad's joy about my marriage, but focused primarily on their relationship and their hopes for future family gatherings. The pattern was always the same: acknowledge my existence just enough to avoid obvious cruelty, then redirect attention to Patricia's version of family that didn't require my meaningful participation. The final blow came when Dad was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 18 months ago. I learned about the diagnosis from my Aunt Rosa, who'd heard through family gossip rather than direct communication from Dad or Patricia. When I called immediately, Patricia answered the phone. "Oh, Elena, yes. Miguel wanted to call you himself, but the doctor's appointments have been overwhelming. You understand how medical situations can be chaotic." Chaotic? Again, life's complexities were characterized as instability, rather than normal human experience. "Patricia, I'd like to be involved in Dad's care planning and treatment decisions. I can help with transportation, appointment scheduling, or anything else that would be useful." "That's sweet of you to offer, but we have everything well organized. Miguel's sister Maria has been helping with medical appointments, and my family has been providing meal support. Adding more people to the coordination would just create confusion." I was being excluded from my own father's cancer treatment by a woman who'd spent 15 years positioning herself as his primary family, while treating me as a well-meaning, unnecessary complication. Over the following months, I had to fight for every piece of information about Dad's condition. Doctor appointments were scheduled without my knowledge. Treatment updates came through relatives who'd heard second-hand reports. Visiting required advance permission and was subject to Dad's energy levels as interpreted by Patricia. "Miguel had a difficult week with chemotherapy," she'd explain. "He's not up for visitors right now." But I'd hear from cousins that other people had been visiting regularly, that Dad was asking about me, that he seemed confused about why I wasn't around more often. The truth was that Patricia was managing information flow to maintain control over Dad's support network while positioning herself as his primary caregiver and family representative. When Dad entered hospice care 6 weeks ago, I learned about the transition from the hospice social worker who called looking for next of kin information. Patricia had listed herself as primary contact, but hadn't informed me that Dad's condition had deteriorated to end-of-life care. I drove immediately to the hospice facility and found Dad sleeping peacefully, much thinner than I'd seen him last, but still recognizably my father. Patricia was in the room, organizing flower arrangements and speaking quietly with nursing staff about visitor policies. "Elena, what a surprise," she said when she saw me. "Miguel's been resting most of the day. The doctors think it's better to keep stimulation to a minimum." I ignored Patricia and sat beside Dad's bed, taking his hand and speaking quietly to him about memories we'd shared, about how proud I was to be his daughter, about how much I loved him. He squeezed my hand and opened his eyes, smiling when he saw me. "Elena, Mia, I was hoping you'd come." We talked for an hour about family memories, about his pride in my career and marriage, about his hopes for my future happiness. It was the most unfiltered conversation we'd had in years, free from Patricia's management and interpretation. Before I left, Dad asked to speak with me privately. Patricia reluctantly stepped out of the room, clearly unhappy about being excluded from the conversation. "Elena, I need to tell you something important," Dad said, his voice weak but clear. "I've been thinking about what I want to happen at my funeral, and I want you to know that you're the most important person in my life. You're my legacy, my greatest achievement." "Dad, you don't need to worry about funeral planning right now. Focus on getting comfortable." "No, Mia, I need to say this while I can. Patricia has been, protective of our family life, but sometimes protection becomes control. I want you to know that nothing she's done changes how much I love you or how proud I am of the woman you've become." He paused, gathering strength. "I've recorded something for you, something I want played at my funeral if there are any problems with you being able to speak. Mr. Henderson from the funeral home has the recording, and he knows to use it if needed." "Dad, what kind of problems?" "Elena, I know Patricia better than you think I do. I love her, but I also know she has strong ideas about how things should be handled. I don't want those ideas to prevent you from saying goodbye to me properly." 3 days later, Dad passed away peacefully with Patricia and me both present. The funeral arrangements had been planned by Patricia months earlier, with input from Dad on some details but with her managing all logistics and communication. The service was scheduled for Sacred Heart Cathedral, where Dad had been a parishioner for 20 years. The guest list included over 200 people from the school district, our extended family, and their social circle. When I asked Patricia about speaking at the service, she was polite but firm in her refusal. Elena, Miguel and I discussed the eulogy arrangements months ago. We decided to keep the speaking roles limited to immediate family members to maintain the dignity and flow of the service. "I am an immediate family member, Patricia. I'm his daughter." "Of course you are, dear. But the speakers will be myself, as his wife, and Father Martinez, who knew Miguel through parish activities. We felt that multiple speakers would make the service too long, and potentially emotional." The implication was clear. My grief was too messy, too uncontrolled, too potentially disruptive for Patricia's vision of a dignified farewell. "Patricia, I need to speak at my father's funeral. He would want me to share memories and express what he meant to me." "Elena, I understand you're grieving, but this service has been carefully planned. Adding additional speakers at the last minute would be disrespectful to the other arrangements." That morning I arrived at Sacred Heart Cathedral an hour early, hoping to speak with Father Martinez about including brief remarks during the service. Patricia was already there, coordinating with the funeral director and reviewing final details. When the service began, I sat in the front row as Dad's daughter. But I could feel Patricia's tension about my presence and her determination to maintain control over the proceedings. Father Martinez delivered beautiful opening remarks about Dad's dedication to education and his commitment to family and community. Then Patricia approached the podium to give the main eulogy. Her speech was polished and professional, focusing on Dad's career achievements and their life together. She spoke about his love for teaching, his pride in helping students succeed, and the joy he found in their marriage and their shared social and professional activities. Miguel was a man who found his purpose in service to others, she concluded. He devoted himself to his students, his community, and his family. He will be remembered as a leader, an educator, and a loving husband who created a legacy of positive impact. The speech was respectful and accurate, but it felt incomplete. No mention of his pride in raising a daughter who'd become a successful professional. No acknowledgement of the 34 years of love and connection that had shaped who he was as a father. No recognition that his legacy included the woman he'd raised to carry forward his values and achievements. When Patricia finished, she returned to her seat and nodded to Father Martinez, signaling that the eulogy portion of the service was complete. I stood up. "Father Martinez, I'd like to say a few words about my father." The cathedral fell silent. 200 people turned to look at me, then at Patricia, sensing tension they didn't understand. Patricia also stood. "I'm sorry," she announced to the congregation, her voice carrying clearly through the microphone system. "The family has decided that eulogies will come only from immediate family members." The words hit me like a physical blow. She was claiming that I wasn't immediate family at my own father's funeral, in front of everyone who'd known me as Miguel Rodriguez's daughter for 34 years. I started to respond, to assert my right to speak about my own father, when the funeral director, Mr. Henderson, approached the microphone. "Excuse me," he said politely. "Before we continue with the service, Mr. Rodriguez left specific instructions about a recording that should be played if there were any questions about the eulogy arrangements." Patricia's face went white. She clearly had no idea what recording Mr. Henderson was referring to. "A recording?" Father Martinez asked, looking confused. "Yes, Father. Mr. Rodriguez was very specific that this should be played if there were any difficulties with his daughter Elena being able to speak at the service." The cathedral was completely silent. 200 people waited as Mr. Henderson walked to the sound system and inserted a CD that Dad had prepared weeks earlier. The speakers crackled briefly, then filled with Dad's voice, weak from illness but unmistakably clear and determined. "If you're hearing this recording, it means my daughter Elena isn't being allowed to speak at my funeral, which breaks my heart but doesn't surprise me. Elena, if you're listening, I want you and everyone else to know something important." Petra had sunk back into her pew, her face pale and her hands shaking. Dad's voice continued. "Elena Rodriguez is the greatest achievement of my life. For 34 years, she has been my pride, my joy, and my greatest source of happiness. She is brilliant, compassionate, successful, and everything I could have hoped for in a daughter." I was crying now, but I could also hear other people in the congregation crying with me. "Elena, I love you more than words can express. You are my legacy, my continuation in this world, and the proof that I did something right during my time here. I am proud of your education, your career, your marriage to Carlos, and the woman you've become." His voice grew stronger, more passionate. "To everyone listening, Elena is not just my daughter. She is my heart walking around outside my body. She is the person who inherited my values, my love of learning, and my commitment to treating others with respect and dignity." The cathedral was completely silent except for Dad's recorded voice and the quiet sounds of people crying throughout the congregation. "Patricia, if you're listening to this, I love you, and I'm grateful for the 15 years we shared together. But love doesn't give anyone the right to erase other relationships or rewrite history. Elena was part of my life long before you, and she will carry my memory long after today." Patricia was openly sobbing now, whether from grief or shame or both. Dad's voice continued. "Elena, I want you to know that every day I was proud to be your father. When you graduated college, when you started your career, when you married Carlos, when you became the strong, independent woman you are today, all of those moments filled me with more joy than I knew how to express." He paused, gathering strength for his final words. "Elena, you have my permission to live your life with confidence that your father loved you completely, supported you totally, believed in you, absolutely. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." The recording ended with the soft click of the machine turning off. The cathedral remained silent for what felt like minutes, though it was probably only seconds. I stood up again, walked to the podium, and looked out at the congregation that included relatives, family friends, Dad's colleagues, and dozens of people I didn't recognize. "Thank you for letting me share who my father really was," I said, my voice steady despite the tears on my cheeks. I spoke for 10 minutes about Dad's dedication to his students, his pride in helping people achieve their potential, and his unwavering support for my dreams even when they took me in directions he didn't fully understand. I talked about his love of learning, his commitment to justice, and his belief that education could change lives. I shared stories about Saturday morning pancakes, help with algebra homework, and conversations about life choices that had shaped my values and character. Most importantly, I talked about his pride in watching me grow into an independent woman who carried forward his belief in treating others with dignity and respect. When I finished, the congregation applauded, not polite, obligatory clapping, but sustained, genuine appreciation for finally hearing the complete story of who Miguel Rodriguez had been as a father. Patricia approached me after the service, her eyes red, and her voice barely above a whisper. "Elena, I owe you an apology. I never meant to hurt you or dishonor your relationship with Miguel. Patricia, I don't need an apology. I need understanding. For 15 years you treated me like a complication in Dad's life rather than a central part of who he was. I was protecting our marriage, our life together. I didn't want the complications of divided loyalties or competing relationships. Love isn't a zero-sum game, Patricia. Dad loving me didn't diminish his love for you. My relationship with him didn't threaten your marriage, it enriched his life and made him a more complete person. She nodded, crying quietly. I know that now. The recording, hearing how much you meant to him, I realized how much I'd missed. By seeing you as a threat instead of as part of what made Miguel who he was. 6 months later, Patricia and I have developed a relationship based on our shared love for Dad, rather than competition for his attention. She's shown me photo albums from their 15 years together that include pictures of me I'd never seen, moments when Dad had talked about me with pride and love. More importantly, she acknowledged that her efforts to minimize my role in Dad's life had hurt both of us and had deprived Dad of the complete family relationships he'd wanted to maintain. The funeral recording wasn't about vindication or winning a family conflict. It was about Dad's determination that truth be heard even when the people who loved him couldn't find ways to share space gracefully. If you're still watching at this point, drop voice in the comments so I know who understood that love sometimes has to fight to be heard. The lesson I learned from that funeral wasn't about family dynamics or step-parent relationships. It was about the importance of expressing love and recognition while we're still alive to do so, rather than assuming people understand how we feel about them. Dad's recording wasn't just a message to me, it was a lesson for everyone in that cathedral about the damage that comes from treating relationships like competitions, rather than opportunities for connection. Love multiplies when it's shared. Dad's love for me didn't diminish his love for Patricia, just as his love for Patricia didn't require erasing his love for me. But it took his death and a recording he'd made in anticipation of exactly this conflict to teach all of us that fundamental truth. Family relationships work best when they're based on inclusion rather than exclusion, on celebrating all the love in someone's life rather than defending territory against perceived threats. The most important relationships require space for everyone who matters, especially when, those relationships are complicated by divorce, remarriage, and the complex dynamics of blended families. Tell me about a time when someone you loved had to fight to make their feelings known. How did that experience change your understanding of what it means to protect the people we care about versus trying to control the relationships around us?